What if I told you there's a God mentioned in the Bible who actually dared to confront the Creator himself and was erased from the scriptures by the priests? You've probably heard about the fallen angels at the final judgment. But what if I told you there's a forgotten spiritual being, a rebellious God who challenged the Lord of hosts, a mysterious figure wrapped in shadows whose existence scribes and priests have carefully hidden over the centuries? This story isn't found in your church sermons or in traditional theology books. It's been silenced, censored, and hidden by those who decided what belongs and what doesn't in the scriptures. But traces remain in ancient fragments, apocryphal texts, and cryptic quotes from forgotten prophets. It's a spiritual drama that began long before humanity was created, involving a power struggle between the Most High God and a celestial being who dared to want more. Why haven't you heard of this? Why was that name erased? Why was this story considered too dangerous to be known? Maybe religious leaders hid this part of the revelation because it threatened the foundations of traditional faith. The Bible is full of mysteries, and this is one of the most fascinating. We're talking about a spiritual character mentioned indirectly, hidden behind metaphors and general titles like sons of God, powers, principalities, or gods. But this one didn't just reveal himself. He directly challenged the heavenly throne, confronted the sovereign, and for that was cast out not only from heaven but also from the scriptures. Are you ready for this? Get ready to dive into a story few dare to tell. A story erased by human hands but preserved through spiritual signs, cross-references, and the intuition of those who sense there's more beneath the sacred words. Over the centuries, books have been burned, verses omitted, names forgotten. But now, the time has come to recover what was lost, to bring to light the name and deeds of a God who opposed the Lord and paid an eternal price for it. And what if I told you that Jesus himself mentioned these gods in a passage many interpret superficially? What if the Psalms, the prophets, and even the patriarchs left clues about other spiritual beings with authority and power, but who strayed from the divine purpose? Where does this forgotten God fit in the celestial hierarchy? And why does his existence still unsettle scholars and mystics today? Maybe that's why the official tradition has tried to erase his memory. Maybe that God was never meant to be known. Maybe revealing his story means touching something many would rather leave buried. But you're here, and not by accident. Because those who seek the truth aren't satisfied with what they've been told. They want to uncover what's been hidden. Get ready to learn the identity of a spiritual being who challenged the Creator. An ancient mystery buried between the lines of Revelation. A secret that could change how you see the spiritual world, the celestial war, and the role of angels and humans in the divine realm. Before we continue, I want to invite you. If this topic already moves you, if something inside is awakening as you hear this, pause for a moment and join me on this journey. Hit like right now, not just as a show of support, but as a signal to YouTube that this content should reach more people like you, searching for answers beyond what they've always been told. Comment below. Have you heard about the existence of other gods in the Bible? Do you think some truths have been censored by religious leaders throughout history? Your thoughts matter because this channel is a space for deep spiritual exploration, and every comment helps create a sacred conversation that enriches us all. And of course, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. What comes next will open your spiritual eyes even more. You're about to learn hidden details, fragments buried in the scriptures, and connections revealing one of the greatest mysteries ever erased from sacred history. Let's keep going. Now that you're connected to this spiritual mystery, it's time to open the scriptures with fresh eyes. You need to read the sacred text not just from a traditional religious view, but with spiritual discernment, because hidden revelations don't always jump out right away. The Bible doesn't hide mysteries. It encodes them. And one of the most overlooked codes is this: the existence of other beings called lesser gods. Yes, you heard that right. The Bible itself, the text so many churches treat as the ultimate authority, acknowledges there are other Elohim, the plural form of the Hebrew word for God. But these Elohim aren't idols or pagan inventions. They're real spiritual beings created by God, each with different roles in the heavenly realm. Take Psalm 82:1, for example, a passage read superficially for centuries. But when you dig in, it's startling. God stands in the divine assembly. He judges among the gods. Do you see what's there? A divine council, with God standing among other gods, judging them. This isn't an allegory or metaphor. It's a glimpse of spiritual reality that's been silenced because it challenges the religious idea of a heaven filled only with passive angels and saints playing harps. These gods are heavenly beings appointed by God as rulers, spiritual princes over nations, peoples, and territories. This idea also appears in Deuteronomy 32:8, which older manuscripts like those from Qumran say, "When the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the sons of men, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God." Notice, sons of God. In some newer versions, this phrase has been changed to sons of Israel. But the original, and the one most aligned with ancient Hebrew, makes it clear there were spiritual beings given authority by God over different nations, and that's where the mystery begins. Among these beings, there was one who stood out, not for loyalty, but for boldly challenging the Creator himself. An Elohim who rebelled not just against his role, but against the very order of heaven's kingdom. He wanted worship, he craved dominion, he wanted more than what was given to him. And when that happened, judgment followed. Just as Psalm 82 says, when God declares, "I said, you are gods, and all of you are sons of the Most High. Yet you will die like mere men, and fall like any prince." This passage marks a turning point. God acknowledges these beings as gods, sons of the Most High, that is, heavenly beings created by him. But when they became corrupt, they were sentenced to die like humans, to be brought down like any earthly ruler. This is more than poetry. It's a veiled account of a celestial rebellion, a silent uprising that stretches across time and still echoes today in spiritual realms invisible to the natural eye. This forgotten God, whose identity we're about to uncover, wasn't just any spirit. He held authority. He was placed in a position of spiritual leadership. But unlike Michael, who served faithfully, or Gabriel, who carried out his missions obediently, this one sought to exalt himself above the throne. The prophet Isaiah captures this rebellion when he speaks of the fall of the morning star. "You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will be like the Most High." Isaiah 14:13. This describes a celestial being who desired the impossible, to be equal with God himself. Many interpret this passage as referring to Satan, and yes, it fits. But what if there were others who also fell into that same desire to usurp the throne? What if one of them was erased from the story? As you can see, the Bible has layers, and it's between the lines that the deepest mysteries hide. These lesser gods or fallen Elohim aren't just ancient myths. They're spiritual beings who, like us, had choices. And some chose to stray. One of them, in particular, openly defied the Lord and was erased from the official memory of the faith. But how do you erase a God from history? Simple. You don't talk about him, don't read about him, don't mention his origins or his fall. Ancient scribes and scripture compilers, guided by priests, decided what would or wouldn't be part of the final text. That doesn't mean God's word was corrupted. But the canon was shaped by certain criteria, and many stories got left out, including the one about this forgotten god. Yet God left traces. Verses like the ones we just read weren't erased, only ignored or twisted in interpretation. But anyone with spiritual eyes can see it. Anyone thirsty for truth will keep searching until they find it. Now you stand before this truth, a buried being, a spiritual entity who rejected his role, who wanted dominion, worship, control. And for that, he fell. He was silenced, but not completely. Fragments of his name appear in ancient texts like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and even in secret rabbinic traditions. Some scholars believe he influenced kings and empires, that he was worshipped in cultures condemned by the prophets, and that his influence still echoes today in spiritual realms, shaping governments and ideologies. If that's true, his story needs to be known. Because as Hosea 4:6 says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." It's this kind of knowledge, not popular, not accepted by everyone, but deep and freeing, that we're going to explore here. Now I want to ask you, had you heard about Psalm 82 and this divine council? Do you believe there are more spiritual beings at work than churches usually teach? Write in the comments, "I'm seeing the Bible with new eyes," if this opened your understanding. Or write, "I want to know more about the hidden gods of the Bible." Your voice matters. It shows me you're ready for the next part of this journey. Let's keep going. If the Bible shows God judging a council made up of other gods, and that among these sons of the Most High there was rebellion, disobedience, and judgment, the big question is, who was the God who dared defy the Lord? What was his origin? What role did he have in God's plan before the rebellion? And why was his presence so threatening that it was erased from the official scriptures? The answer might not be found fully within the 66 books of the traditional Bible, but echoes of this lost figure appear in apocryphal and extra-canonical texts, and in the oldest traditions of Israel. The more you explore these sources, the clearer it becomes that this being was more than just an angel. One of the Bene Elohim, the sons of God, mentioned in Genesis 6 and in the book of Job. Beings who didn't just watch the divine throne, but took part in spiritual councils, made decisions, and held authority over parts of creation. And here a name appears that many have heard, but few truly understand. Azazel. Yes, Azazel, a name wrapped in darkness and mystery, but mentioned directly in Leviticus 16, in the ritual of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. In this ritual, 2 male goats are chosen, one sacrificed to the Lord, the other sent to Azazel in the wilderness, a symbolic and mysterious act that has sparked debate for centuries. Who was Azazel? A place, a concept, a being? The oldest traditions and extra-canonical texts give a clear answer. Azazel was a real spiritual being, a rebellious figure who, according to the Book of Enoch, was one of the leaders of the angels who came down to earth and corrupted creation. Not only did he sin, but he taught humanity to sin, revealed forbidden magic, forged weapons, seduced human women, and brought corruption into the world. Azazel was a transgressor, a corrupter, a master of destruction. In the Book of Enoch, chapter 8, we read that Azazel taught humans how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He showed them how to work with the metals of the earth. He revealed to them the secrets of witchcraft and enchantments. It's pretty striking. A spiritual being who turned against God's original plan and gave humanity things that pull them away from holiness. He's not just a fallen angel. He's an agent of spiritual corruption. Most notably, according to the same book, Azazel was judged by God and imprisoned in darkness until the day of judgment. He was banished, thrown into an abyss, covered with sharp stones, confined in silence. The text says, "All the earth has been corrupted by the works of Azazel, and he must be held responsible for all sin." This lines up strongly with Psalm 82, where God pronounces judgment on the rebellious gods. "You will die like men." It's as if this being crossed every line imaginable: betrayal, seduction, corruption. As a result, his name was wiped from collective spiritual memory. When priests organized the scriptures, they left out books like Enoch, Jubilees, and others that openly talked about Azazel. Maybe out of fear, maybe to protect people, maybe as a spiritual strategy. But he didn't disappear completely. The concept remains. The existence of this being, though omitted, still echoes. Think about it. Why was the scapegoat ritual for Azazel kept in Leviticus, even without explanation? Why do so many ancient cultures talk about fallen beings, rebel demigods, and bearers of forbidden knowledge? And why did Christian tradition lose touch with these stories that were so present in the early centuries? The answer might be in who Azazel really is. He represents what many don't want to face, that evil isn't just the absence of good, but also a corrupt spiritual intelligence, an evil that thinks, teaches, seduces, spreads, and still influences today. Some scholars believe Azazel was a key inspiration behind pagan worship in Canaan. Behind gods like Baal, Molech, and Astarte, this being might have been pulling the strings, wanting to be worshipped as the Most High. It makes sense if you consider that he didn't just want to reveal himself, but to take God's place, to receive worship, sit on thrones, and create competing religions. And this isn't just theory. When the Bible condemns the gods of the nations, it often links them with demons. Deuteronomy 32:17 says, "They sacrifice to demons, not to God. To gods they never knew, new gods who recently appeared, whom your ancestors didn't fear." That's a strong statement. It shows a hidden spiritual reality behind the nations, entities disguised as gods, and our forgotten figure might have been one of them, or even their leader. Now think about this. If Azazel was forgotten, it's not because he was unimportant. Only what threatens, disturbs, or has dangerously powerful influence gets forgotten. A secret of spiritual warfare that, if uncovered, can awaken sleeping consciences. Maybe that's why you're here. Because something inside you knows the spiritual world is bigger than you've been told. That there are entities working behind human systems. That the powers and principalities Paul talks about in Ephesians 6:12 aren't just figures of speech. They're real, ancient, fallen beings. And some have even been called gods. To this day, Azazel symbolizes that forced forgetting. A god who dared to teach forbidden things, took on a role that wasn't his, wanted to be like the Most High, but was cast into darkness. A being who, even as he was erased from books, still whispers from the shadows. If this story has moved you, type in the comments. I want to know the whole truth about Azazel's influence today. And if this topic opened your eyes, write, "There's no faith without knowledge." These aren't just comments. They're signals that there's an awakened community ready to discover what's hidden. Let's keep moving because this story is far from over. The moment this spiritual being, once exalted in heaven, decided to cross the limits of divine authority, one of the most hidden and explosive stories of the spiritual world started to unfold. The rebellion didn't begin with open war or thunder, but with a thought, a secret desire, pride growing in silence. That desire, which started as a spark, became a spiritual fire that struck at the very heart of heaven's order. This forgotten god, Azazel, one of the sons of the Most High who followed the same path, was among the first to look at the throne and want not just to stand before it, but to sit above it. The Bible gives us glimpses of this kind of pride in Isaiah 14. While many see this as a symbol for the king of Babylon, the language and depth suggests something beyond a mere earthly ruler. It says, "You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly on the farthest heights. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." Notice the boldness here. This isn't just ambition. It's the desire to steal the Creator's place, not just to resemble God, but to be God Himself. And in the spiritual realm, that's more than blasphemy. It's an attempted celestial coup, and the Bible doesn't stop there. In Ezekiel 28, we find another passage packed with details that, while it seems to address a human king, the king of Tyre, includes descriptions that simply don't fit an ordinary man. There, God says, "You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. You were a cherub anointed to protect, and I appointed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until wickedness was found in you." If that doesn't give you chills, maybe you should read it again carefully. A cherub in Eden, perfect from the start until the moment of corruption. This points directly to a spiritual being of high celestial rank, created with honor, beauty, and authority, but who let vanity creep into his heart. Here we see the root of the conflict: spiritual pride, a subtle poison spreading through the core of the heavenly soul until it no longer recognizes the Lord's sovereignty. Pride, self-exaltation, and the hunger for control, all of these fueled the break. And once the rebellion turned into action, there was no going back. God's throne had been challenged. At that moment, it wasn't just an individual uprising. It was the start of a real spiritual war in the heavens. Many scholars believe this was the first great cosmic battle before the fall of man, shaping the spiritual landscape of our world today. In this conflict, other spiritual beings, seduced by the promise of power, joined the rebel, maybe a third of the heavenly host. Many connect this to Revelation 12, where the dragon sweeps a third of the stars from the sky with his tail. What we know for sure is that this was no symbolic fight. It was real, spiritual, and decisive. The Lord, being just, would not tolerate a divided throne. His authority is absolute, and anyone opposing this sacred order opposes the very essence of light. And that's how judgment came. The rebel, now the enemy of heaven, was cast out, thrown down from the holy mountain, removed from the glorious presence, banished from the divine assembly, and his sentence was sealed with fire. As Ezekiel says, "I caused fire to come out from among you. It consumed you, and I turned you to ashes on the earth." But don't be fooled. Though defeated in heaven, this being didn't disappear. His influence lives on. Since he can't return to the throne, his strategy has changed. He works to pull as many souls as possible away from the light. He operates behind the scenes, in systems, distorted doctrines, false religions, and philosophies that deny biblical truth. His rebellion against the Lord hasn't stopped. It just took a new form. Maybe that's why his name was erased, because revealing his story also reveals his work. And by exposing his work, the church is forced to recognize that even today, a spiritual influence moves within human systems, governments, ideologies, and corrupt religious circles. This being dared to want to be like the Most High, and so he was humbled. But his memory, though silenced, still pulses behind the scenes in the sacred text. He was the first to seek total spiritual autonomy, something many today, even within the faith, pursue. A faith without dependence, spirituality without obedience, a search for the sacred apart from the Lord of the sacred. And that's the same mistake that led to the fall of the forgotten God. Now pause for a moment and think with me. How many today are following that same path? How many chase spiritual power, mystical experiences, visions, or revelations without submitting to the throne? That's the legacy of the rebellion. A spiritual virus spreading quietly, disguised as light, freedom, or wisdom. That's why we need to talk about this forgotten God, because he represents more than a figure from the past. He symbolizes an ongoing battle. He reminds us that the spiritual world is never neutral. We're either with the Lord, or we're being drawn into darkness. And now I want to hear from you. Yes, you who have been following this deep revelation. Tell me in the comments, did the rebellion really start in heaven if this truth has touched you? Or simply write, I choose the throne of the Most High, if you stand spiritually against this hidden influence. These comments aren't just words. They're public declarations of your faith, part of the spiritual battle. What comes next will show how this story still shapes humanity today. Let's keep going. And maybe you're wondering, if this whole story is so powerful and full of deep spiritual truths, why don't we hear about it in sermons? Why does almost nobody talk about this forgotten God? Why do churches, theological schools, and seminaries mostly ignore this part of the spiritual war? The answer lies in something many shy away from: the formation of the biblical canon. Yes, the Bible as we know it today went through a long, complex, very human process, sometimes delicate and often controversial. When we think of the Bible, we usually picture a perfect, sacred book that's been complete from the start. But the truth is, it was put together over centuries by decisions made by religious leaders, priests, scribes, councils, rabbis, and church patriarchs. They chose which books to keep, which to read publicly, which deserved to be called inspired by God, and which to leave out, hide, or forget. And that's when you begin to see how stories like the one about the forgotten God got erased. Not because they were false, but because they were too dangerous. They were seen as threats to the doctrinal order that was being built, because they revealed truths that could shake the spiritual control some leaders wanted to hold over people. For centuries, books like Enoch, Jubilees, Tobit, Baruch, Wisdom, Maccabees, and many others were part of the regular spiritual reading among believers. They were known, discussed, and respected, and most importantly, many communities considered them inspired. Jesus himself, according to all evidence, was familiar with some of these traditions, and the apostles knew them well. But over time, a new authority structure took shape. Religious leaders, both Jewish and Christian, began debating which texts were safe, which were orthodox, and which were heretical. In this process, texts that openly talked about rebellious spiritual beings, heavenly battles, fallen angels, and lesser gods started to be removed from public readings, not because they lacked spiritual value, but because they didn't fit the faith model being defended. So the question remains, who decided what should be forgotten? Who chose to erase names, cut out passages, reinterpret stories, and silence entire topics? The answer? Men in power. Men with intentions. Some good, some not so much. Men who, while trying to protect the faith, often ended up limiting it. And here's the tricky part. This censorship wasn't always done with bad intentions. At many points in history, religious leaders believed they were shielding people from heresies, confusion, and dangerous teachings. They wanted to keep the focus on salvation through Christ, on the one true God. They wanted to prevent people from worshiping angels or gods mentioned in ancient texts. There was zeal, but there was also control. And when zeal turns into control, censorship is born. Picture a priest from the 3rd or 4th century reading the Book of Enoch, seeing detailed accounts of angels who came down to earth and taught magic, weapon making, and astrology. Imagine his reaction when he saw names like Asel, Semasa, and others described as sons of God who fell. Now ask yourself, would that priest allow the general public to read those texts? Or would he prefer only the most educated to know about them? History tells us the answer. Those books were banned. Many were labeled pseudepigrapha or apocrypha, terms that sound scholarly but basically meant one thing: off limits. They were taken out of public worship and readings in synagogues and churches. Their names were replaced with doctrines that were safer, more controlled, and more focused. And just like that, the original story started to unravel. The forgotten God, the spiritual being who challenged the divine throne, vanished from pocket Bibles, catechisms, and sermons, but never disappeared from spiritual reality. His name was erased from the books, but traces of him remain between the lines, in symbols and mysterious verses like those in Psalm 82, Deuteronomy 32, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, and Revelation 12. That's why we're here today, because truth never dies. It only hides for a while and then comes back strong, like a flame cutting through the ages. That's exactly what's happening now. What was lost is being spoken again. What was censored is being uncovered. What was forgotten is being remembered. Many today still shy away from these topics. They say they're complicated, confusing, or dangerous to faith. But are they really dangerous? Or just inconvenient for those who want to keep control? When you understand that other spiritual beings have been at work in the world, that religious manipulation happened, and that doctrinal censorship existed, you become free. And a free person with knowledge is not easy to control. That's why this story was erased. Because it frees us. Because it lifts the veil. Because it shows us that the spiritual world is much bigger than we've been told. And that the battle between light and darkness is happening right now, even in how we interpret the very word. Now that you know this, I want to invite you to do something. Write in the comments, "The truth cannot be silenced," if this revelation is opening your spiritual eyes. Or comment, "I want access to the forgotten books," if you feel a thirst to dig deeper and seek knowledge beyond what's allowed. You can also write, "They tried to erase it, but I will remember," as a sign of spiritual resistance. Your voice here matters. Your opinion, your comment, your hunger for truth is like a signal to the spiritual world that you are awakening. We'll keep going together because the story of this forgotten God is about to reach a new chapter, a chapter that touches on how we see good, evil, and the destiny of humanity. Let's move forward. Despite all efforts to erase this story, despite priests, scribes, and religious leaders deliberately censoring the details, the truth never fully disappeared. There are records that survived the test of time, fragments of forgotten parchments, texts tucked away on the margins of official religions, hidden in caves, isolated libraries, and preserved in ancient oral traditions. It's precisely there that we find the hidden proof that this forgotten God really existed and left a mark. Let's start with the most famous of these excluded texts, the Book of Enoch. This book, even quoted in the Bible itself in Jude 14, was highly respected among early Christians and the ancient Jewish community. It tells in detail the story of the Watchers, angels who came down to earth, became corrupt, took human wives, and taught mankind forbidden knowledge. One name stands out, Azel. The text says clearly, Azel taught men to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. and showed them the metals of the earth and how to work them. He also taught them enchantments and root cutting. Here we see he wasn't just part of the fall. He was responsible for spreading corruption on earth. He took heavenly knowledge and twisted it. He brought power too soon and used the sacred to poison the physical world. What was his punishment? The same text describes how God ordered Asael to be imprisoned in the abyss, chained in darkness, awaiting final judgment. This matches exactly what we saw earlier in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14. The fall of a high-ranking, powerful being corrupted by pride and rebellion. Enoch fills in what the official Bible hints at between the lines. And it doesn't stop there. In the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found at Qumran, including ancient copies of the Book of Enoch alongside many other texts not included in the traditional Bible. These scrolls, preserved in caves for almost 2,000 years, seem to have been hidden by God to protect the truth until the right time to reveal it again. Among these writings are descriptions of heavenly battles, names of fallen spiritual beings, and direct references to the sons of God who ruled nations before the full revelation came to Israel. It's striking how these fragments speak of a heavenly council where different spiritual beings gathered with God, and yet not all stayed loyal. Some chased their own glory, others sought control over creation. Some even took on names and forms among Earth's peoples and were worshipped as gods, a twisted distortion of the original plan. So here's the big question. Why does modern theology ignore all this? Simple. Because dealing with these texts means rethinking everything we've been taught. It means admitting the spiritual war is far more complex, that layers of reality have been overlooked, that invisible forces still influence nations, cultures, and religions today. And for many, that's uncomfortable. The Book of Jubilees, another excluded text, also offers clues. It confirms that fallen angels influenced Noah's descendants, spreading deception and idolatry among mankind. And again, Asael is named as the root of corruption. Even rabbinic texts hold traces of this story. In midrashic commentaries and early Kabbalistic writings, there are mentions of spiritual beings who rebelled, tried to usurp the Creator's rule, and were expelled from the divine presence. Some mystical circles call them Shedim, lesser Elohim, or fallen seraphim. The truth is, this memory never died. It was only buried beneath layers of tradition, censorship, and fear. Archaeological discoveries back this up. Excavations in ancient Near Eastern sites like Ugarit uncovered clay tablets with names of deities resembling biblical figures. Some scholars suggest these show the existence of spiritual beings who were once worshipped, offered sacrifices, and given devotion. Many of these names disappear mysteriously from Scripture or show up only as targets of prophetic judgment. Coincidence? No. This proves the spiritual war was also a war over memory, a battle between remembering and forgetting, revealing and hiding, preserving the sacred and controlling doctrine. Those who lost that battle were banished not only from heaven but also from books, altars, sermons, and schools. Yet they survived, in fragments, in margins, between the lines. And now, right before your eyes, they're coming back. Because there are people who refuse to settle for what they've been told, who won't accept shallow answers, who hunger for deep spiritual knowledge, a full biblical revelation, and a complete understanding of the divine plan. That people is you, if you've made it this far. It's because you hear the Scriptures whispering. You sense there's more than what meets the natural eye. You feel the call of truth beyond religious boundaries. Now, with these texts in your hands, you start to see the full picture, the hidden puzzle, the pieces that were deliberately removed but still exist. And if this evidence is coming to light now, at this very moment, it's no accident. Something is being restored, and those with spiritual ears will understand. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I see the evidence," or "The truth is coming to light." You can also write, "Qumran still speaks," if you feel the Dead Sea Scrolls have opened your eyes today. These comments not only strengthen our spiritual community, they show YouTube that this content is valuable and should be shared. Let's keep going, because what comes next reveals the eternal consequences of the rebellion of this forgotten being. And the impact may be closer than you think. Even though all this evidence survived the shadows of censorship, one question still echoes in the hearts of those open to revelation. What really happened to this rebellious God? What was the outcome of his defiance? Was he simply forgotten, or did he face a final spiritual punishment? To answer this, we need to look again at what's hidden but not destroyed. Rebellion in God's kingdom never ends without consequences. The apocryphal texts, extra-canonical writings, and even parts of the official scriptures point to a profound, detailed, and unavoidable divine judgment. When a heavenly being rebels, he doesn't just turn away from the light. He attacks the very foundation of creation, since everything was made to reflect the Creator's glory. When that reflection is rejected, chaos follows and judgment takes its course. For this forgotten God, his fate wasn't just being erased from memory or left out of the canon. There was punishment, a fall, and imprisonment. As the Book of Enoch, already mentioned, makes clear, the Most High himself decreed that Asael be cast into the depths, not a symbolic place, but a real abyss filled with darkness and sharp stones, kept there until the great day of final judgment. This idea comes up again strongly in the Book of Revelation. In chapter 20, the Apostle John describes a powerful scene that seems to align perfectly with the punishment of these fallen beings. "I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key to the abyss and a great chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss, locked it, and sealed it over him so he could no longer deceive the nations until the 1,000 years were over." This shows us that in the spiritual realm there's a place of imprisonment reserved for rebellious spirits. An abyss, or as some translations say, Tartarus, the deep Sheol, or the bottomless pit. This place is more than just punishment. It's isolation, enforced silence, a complete removal from divine glory. For the one who wanted to be like the Most High, there's no greater agony than being torn from the presence of the one who sustains all things. Second Temple traditions, spanning the time between the return from Babylonian exile and the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, add many details. Intertestamental literature like the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs and the Book of Baruch describe this place of darkness with chains, eternal fire, and unending silence. A prison for the spirits of the proud, waiting for God's final verdict. Strikingly, these traditions keep the names of these beings secret. This is no accident. Forgetting is part of the punishment. Losing their identity is a direct consequence of their rebellion. Their spiritual memory is wiped out as part of their sentence. It's not just being forgotten by people. It's being stripped from what made them significant. Once worshipped, revered, and recognized as spiritual authorities, they lost everything by turning against the Lord. Their greatest torment is that, although they still exist, they have no voice in the divine council. They've been silenced not just on earth, but in eternity. This kind of punishment is more terrifying than any earthly penalty, because true hell isn't just fire and sulfur. It's absence. Absence of light, name, and presence. It's total disconnection from the source of all life. Yet even in imprisonment, their influence isn't completely erased. the spiritual world still echoes with their rebellion. Human ideas, behaviors, institutions, and systems continue to carry the marks of that ancient war. That's why, over centuries, many cultures developed shadow rituals, corrupt religions, and false gods, often unaware that behind those idols stood imprisoned spirits crying out for attention. This is perhaps the saddest effect of the rebellion. Even chained, cast out, and forgotten, the seed of disobedience still grows among humanity. What started as a revolt in heaven became a contagion on earth. And to this day, humanity wrestles with its consequences, because spiritual principles aren't erased by time. They persist. Judgment, though decreed, still awaits fulfillment. Revelation tells us that after imprisonment comes the final judgment. The great white throne will be set up, and all the dead, great and small, will stand before God. Those imprisoned in the lower regions, including these spiritual beings, will be cast into the lake of fire. Until that time comes, they remain silent but active. Their influence, though weakened, still manifests, resonates, and seduces. Perhaps that's the real reason this story was erased, because it reminds us that rebellion isn't just a past event, it's an ongoing reality. It hasn't ended, it's only changed form. Ignoring this leaves one spiritually vulnerable. The forgotten God was punished, yes, but not destroyed. Silenced, yes, but not nullified. His story, though hidden, still teaches us this fundamental truth. There is no rebellion without consequences. The Creator is patient, but never negligent. When His justice comes, it is perfect and eternal. If this message resonates with you, if something has stirred within your spirit, I invite you to comment below. Write, "The abyss doesn't erase the truth." If you understand that even in captivity, the rebel left a spiritual legacy to fight for. Or write, "God's justice is perfect." If you believe judgment is coming for those who defied the throne. Or simply say, "I see the spiritual battle with fresh eyes." If this video series has changed how you see the scriptures. Each comment isn't just words, it's a statement of spiritual awareness, a stand against forgetting. What comes next will show why this forgotten story still matters, and how it connects to humanity's eternal destiny. Let's keep going. After understanding the rebellion, the censorship, the erasure, and the punishment of this spiritual being who dared to stand against the Most High, one question can't be ignored. Did all this happen only in the past, or is it happening right now? Because when we talk about spiritual censorship, we're not just referring to an ancient theological event. We're talking about a continuous cycle, one that repeats under new names and structures, but with the same goal: to hide the truth, shut down spiritual awakening, and silence anything that could open humanity's eyes. Yes, spiritual censorship still exists today. It might not come with bonfires or outright bans, but it shows up in even more dangerous ways. Distractions disguised as entertainment, shallow information replacing deep study of the Word, watered-down teachings that deny spiritual warfare, and leaders who avoid any topic that challenges the invisible forces working behind the scenes. Have you noticed how, in major religious institutions, there's little to no talk about the books that have been left out? Topics like deeper spiritual realms, fallen gods, principalities, spiritual portals, and prophetic signs are often dismissed or labeled as conspiracy theories. This isn't a coincidence. It's control. Awakening a generation's spiritual awareness threatens systems that thrive on ignorance. The truth is, we keep ignoring hidden realities, not because they're impossible to access, but because they make us uncomfortable. They challenge religious models built on security rather than revelation. They confront spiritual complacency, They push us out of our comfort zones and force us to face the reality that we're in the middle of an unseen war, and we have to take a stand. How many times have you felt something was missing in the teachings you've heard? How many times have you read the Bible and noticed gaps, mentions of things too important to leave unexplained? How many times have you been discouraged from asking questions, digging deeper, or researching the texts that were left out? That's because, for centuries, we've built a faith where seeking too much is risky, and knowing too much almost feels sinful. But that's not from God. The Lord has never forbidden knowledge. He is the God of revelation. Scripture says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings." Proverbs 25:2. True spiritual authority comes from seeking, and that's exactly what spiritual censors don't want you to do, because whoever seeks will find, and whoever finds will never bow to any system, only to the throne. This leads us even further. What other knowledge has been hidden? Are there more forgotten names? Other spiritual beings who influenced entire civilizations but were erased from history? And if behind some political, cultural, or even technological systems there are echoes of that original rebellion, could some of the symbols, rituals, and practices we see today be the legacy of an ancient secret cult dating back to the age of fallen gods? Does that sound extreme? Then just look around. We live in a time when the spiritual is replaced by the superficial, mystery by distraction, spiritual warfare by self-help, all with a clear purpose: to keep this generation blind, numb, uncurious, satisfied with surface-level truths, confusing religion with truth, silence with peace. But the signs are everywhere. More people are reporting profound spiritual experiences, visions, dreams, unexplained feelings. There's a growing hunger for ancient knowledge, lost texts, and God's mysteries. This shows a movement is underway. Something is being restored, and that unsettles the powers that be. What's been hidden for centuries is now coming to light. Because the Spirit of truth, the same Spirit who inspired the prophets and revealed heaven's secrets, is raising up a people who won't settle for crumbs. A people unafraid of forbidden names, excluded texts, forgotten symbols. A people who understand that spiritual warfare isn't a metaphor but a real battle happening right now in every decision, every thought, every awakening. This is the generation God is calling. A generation that reads the scriptures with fire in their eyes, prays with discernment, cries out for revelation, honors the sacred, and rejects manipulation. A generation that bows to no system, only to the glory of the eternal. And you, who have stayed with me this far, you're part of it. Why? Because you've listened, you haven't looked away, and something inside you knows this spiritual war hasn't ended. It's only shifted battlefields, and that true, deep, biblical, spiritual knowledge is a weapon. Maybe the most powerful one we have. So I want to invite you to declare it in the comments. Write, "I refuse spiritual silence," because censorship can no longer silence truth. Or write, "The rebellion continues, and I'm awake, because I know there's more behind what we see, and that God reveals himself to those who seek him." If you've decided to be part of the generation that digs deeper, questions, and stands firm, every word you write is a brick in rebuilding the temple of revelation. Every comment, a flame reigniting the altar of truth. What's coming next will connect everything we've covered and reveal the ultimate impact of this forgotten God in the last days. Let's move forward. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognizes the importance of everything we've uncovered in this video. And if this message has touched your spirit, now is the time to take action. First, subscribe to the channel. Here, we dive deeper into hidden truths, the mysteries of Scripture, and spiritual revelations erased from history. Don't miss out on this journey. Next, hit the like button right now. If you've watched all the way through, that like shows you're part of the minority who are spiritually awake. It's a simple but powerful way to help this video reach others who are also searching for truth. Then, leave a comment that says, "I've watched to the end, and the truth has awakened me." This lets everyone know you're one of this generation's spiritual watchmen and helps strengthen our community of seekers. Finally, check out the next video that's about to appear on your screen. It's a direct continuation of this revelation, and what you'll see there can open your eyes even wider to what's really happening in the spiritual realm. See you in the next one. Shalom.